Greetings, audience. This is Pastor Guru from GGF Kowai studio for GPT, which is defined as a Grace People Talk. And with me, my friend Noah. And we are going to be talking about Romans chapter 10. And we have done an episode on Romans chapter 9, maybe more than one, right? So, more than one episode on Romans 9. And if you have not watched those episodes, I request you to watch. And this is in continuation to that. And Romans is a beautiful book. And this book, scholars divide it into three segments, and they say 1 to 8 is one segment, 9 to 11 is another segment, and 12 to 16 is the third segment. The entire theme of Romans is righteousness. In the first segment, Apostle Paul is writing in such a way that how a man can be made righteous before God. And in the last segment, 12 to 16, Apostle Paul is talking about the righteous deeds of a believer in Christ who is made righteous. And why in the middle, 9 to 11? And is he something mentioning about righteousness? Yes, he does mention about righteousness. How this righteousness is terribly misunderstood by the Jewish people. And in a sense, the entire theme can be put as righteousness of God. And in Romans 10, these three chapters, may it be 9 or 10 or 11, and he begins with a tremendous burden, and there is a heart cry, and he says, my heart's desire and prayer is for them that his people, that is Jewish people, to be saved. And he is saying, what is the problem of their salvation, or what stops them from being saved? And he talks about their zeal. They have such a zeal for God, but their zeal is totally void of knowledge. The knowledge of righteousness is missing. They are absolutely ignorant about the righteousness of God, and they are trying to establish their own righteousness. So, when we talk about ignorance, and this is not specifically Noah for the Jewish people, that they have misunderstood the righteousness of God, and we see all kinds of religious people, even in India, they have no clue about the righteousness of God. And the righteousness of God is a character that is closely associated with the holiness of God. And in the Old Testament, it says that God is righteous and his name is righteousness. When we say God is righteous, and it is not by doing something, by not doing something, he became righteous. It is in his essence, it is in his intrinsic character. He is 100% righteous, and he is forever righteous, and he has not gained righteous by doing something, and he has not gained righteous by not doing something. But whereas when it comes to the human beings, if I do good things, then I can develop an understanding that I am righteous. If I don't do bad things, then I can say that I am a righteous person. And this is something acquired righteousness of human beings. And this righteousness cannot merit their standing before God. And God cannot accept with the borrowed or acquired righteousness that is in their account. And this is really, stops them from salvation. And I think he writes out of his own experience, and he was a zealous Jew, and he was killing Christians. And he even writes in other epistles that I was zealous, but I was absolutely ignorant when I persecuted the church. And this misunderstanding concerning righteousness that really, took them away from salvation.
Yeah, wow. So when we talk about the ignorance of the Jewish people, because this here it specifically talks about the Jewish nation. Apostle Paul writes it, I want my brethren to be saved.
Yeah.
Although it can be taken like in a larger context, like in our generation and in our country also in this time. This here is addressed to Jewish ignorance. The Jewish ignorance being there is a contrast between the righteousness of doing, and there is a contrast between the righteousness of believing.
Believing, exactly.
So believing is what Apostle Paul says the righteousness of faith, and but here they wanted to be under the law, so they elevated the law to a status where they were like, we want to do it to be justified. We don't want to be justified by faith. So that is the misunderstanding they had concerning the law. And this zeal is mistaken for the knowledge of the divine things. They had knowledge. The Pharisees had knowledge. If a Jewish person that they know the law more than they can know about themselves, they know the law, but then they did not know the righteousness that comes by faith. And I read somewhere it says that the divine righteousness, the human righteousness cannot substitute the divine holiness.
Wow.
Um,
Beautiful. Yeah. Amazing. So yeah, I liked the point that you brought out. No, so one is like a different sort of ignorance, and the other ignorance is that they really believe that they can do, and they can obey the law, and they can become righteous. Wow, that is a terrible ignorance uh, to talk about.
and when we see here in verse 4, 10 verse 4, it says, Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So here Apostle Paul says that Christ is the end. Christ came, he fulfilled the law, and he obeyed every single letter of the law, and then he went to the cross and he died on the cross. This obedience is not the righteousness that comes by faith. His death on the cross, Christ is the culmination of the law himself. Christ came and he said in the Gospels, he said, You have heard it is written, but I say to you, which means Christ himself is the end of the law.
End of the law. Wow. So his death, in his death, there was a great exchange. So some call it as grace exchange, and our sins were placed upon him. And the moment, no, so we believe and we are made righteous, and his righteousness is credited to us. And I just want to slip in a couple of points about the demerits of self-righteousness. Just think about self-righteousness, the one who believes that by doing he gained some righteousness. What are some of the characters of that kind of a person? And in Matthew 18, there are two guys that go into the temple, and Jesus tells in that parable, and he is so self-satisfied, and he says, I tithe and I do this and I do this. And he believed, or he lives in a self-deception that has gained him standing before God. And the second demerit is it's a false peace that gives you. Second demerit is that you constantly look down on others. Yeah. And if I am self-righteous, and I will be looking down on others. And the third demerit is the self-righteousness absolutely misunderstands law. Right? The complete understanding of the law. So what is complete exposition of the law? In Matthew 5, he said, when you look at a woman, you have committed adultery in a different angle, I mean. And these people believed that, okay, only the action is related to adultery. And there is a misunderstanding of the law itself comes into picture. And that is the third demerit that I was thinking about. It final demerit is very, very dangerous. It makes you rebellious against God. Because it says that Apostle Paul 10 verse 3, they never submitted themselves to the righteousness of God because they had something to boast about. And they kind of like topped on top of the righteousness of God. They kind of like showed their fist against God that I can be better righteous. And that is the fourth demerit that we can see about the self-righteousness.
As you said, they were not able to come under the righteousness of God. Here we also see that the salvation is very simple.
Yes.
The faith that comes is very simple. Moses also spoke of this, like who will go and bring, and who will go across the sea and bring. So that's what we see here also, Apostle Paul quoting, who will go up to the heavens and who will go up into the grave and come back. He says the word is near you. It's very closer to you. And he says, you can confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and by faith you can receive it. It's very simple. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah. So thank you, Noah. And like no, so I mean, this submission is not something that is like oppressive in its nature, and you want to submit yourself because it is made easy for you, right? You want to submit yourself because it is something given to you out of love. And Deuteronomy says that he says the one who lives by the one who does the commandments will live by them. And which one is difficult? Doing the law. No, look at the 10 commandments, and also coupled with that, the expository nature of the commandments, total in number is 623, I believe. And doing all those things and living by that, and because the law cannot impart life to you.
Yeah.
And by doing this, you can be living, not die. You have to present the sacrifice when you disobey the law. And is that difficult? Or, as you said, you don't have to go up, and you don't have to scale the heights, you don't have to plumb the depths, but Christ is right next to you. And he made things easy. And I think if that is presented to me in love, and the submission is not a dirty word for me, and I really come under that love, and because God loved me so much, and I am a depraved person, and He made things easy for me, and He says, just believe. And as Abraham did, it was credited unto him as righteous in Genesis 15:6. And I become a righteous person, declared by God as justified, and I begin my communion with God without any hindrance. And that is, I think, a beautiful thing that you pointed out.
Yeah, so here it also talks about the human responsibility that comes. God has made it very simple, and it's as simple as I can confess through my mouth that Jesus is Lord, and in my heart I believe and I confess, and I am saved. And this is not just for the Jewish nation; it's not for those who are under the law also, but to us who have never had the law, Gentiles, and to everyone who believes. And that's what here it says, that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And whoever calls, it also again puts the human responsibility. Whoever sees their depravity and calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved.
Oh, I like both the points that you said. The first point that you say is the human responsibility plays a crucial role. I think in Romans chapter 9, he talks about divine sovereignty. And when he talks about divine sovereignty, and he talks about the grace behind it, and God did choose a nation, but it is gracious choice. And in this chapter, he dedicates to the human responsibility, and you need to believe to be saved. And it is given to you on a platter, and you need to receive it. You need to accept it to be saved. And that is the first point that you mentioned. The second point that you mentioned is it is no longer confined to the boundary of the Jewish race, or the nation of Israel, and whoever calls on the name of the Lord. Right? People have a problem with the pronoun, but I don't think, so we should have a problem with this pronoun, relative pronoun. Whoever, it's a relative pronoun which includes everybody and anybody. And that's how the gospel has come. And I like both the points that you pointed out. And there is a human responsibility. It does play a definite and crucial role in it, and it is definitely not confined to a particular race, and confined to a particular gender, or confined to a particular country or a status. And it is available for all the people. It is not only made easy, but it is also made available for all. That is how the gospel goes.
Wow. So here, right after we see all these things, Apostle Paul talks about the responsibility that is upon the church.
Yes.
God calls Isaiah. Isaiah says, "Who will go for us?"
Yes.
And he says, "Lord, I will go."
Wow.
And then here you see that God says, like, who will? I mean, how will they believe if you don't go? And there are a bunch of things that he says. How then they call on him whom they have not believed, and how then shall they believe in whom they have not heard, and how they shall hear without a preacher, and how shall they preach unless they are not sent?
Wow.
So can you speak a lot of that?
It's a good thing that you're pointing out, Noah. Thank you so much. And look at here. So now I am saved because salvation is made easy. Now I am saved because I'm also included, though I'm not part of the Jewish race. Now, being a church, there are two responsibilities. One is the responsibility of an unbeliever receiving the gospel, and the second responsibility is the responsibility of the church taking the gospel. And if you put these six verbs that he is talking about, so being sent, and then you go, and what do? So you preach, and after that people hear, and then fourth one is they believe, and I think the fifth one is they get saved. I don't know if I covered all the verbs that are there. So being sent is one verb, and then preaching is another verb, and then hearing is the third verb, and then believing is the fourth verb, and then calling on God is the fifth verb, and being saved is the sixth verb. And all these things, so beautifully defined. And I know you said Isaiah chapter 6, right? And he appears before God, and he feels his own depravity, and then God kind of like cleanses his lips, and he's realizing that, oh, he's made righteous. And then God is saying, who will go for us? And that burden of the Lord is presented to the believer, and the believer takes that, and the divine responsibility, the evangelical responsibility of the church is very, very important. And that's why we go, right? So you are the one who is organizing the trips to Blitz and the soul winnings, and thank you so much for doing it. And this, in this place, the responsibility of the church, that is very, very crucial, beautifully presented by God himself in this place.
And God also honors it, I believe, because here again it says, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel. God sends us, God saves us, and we receive it by faith, and it is the grace of God that we receive. And God has given us the grace to go out, and God says, how beautiful are you?
Or the feet. Oh, wow. So this morning before I came to GPT, I looked at as much as my face. I did not look my feet, right? So, but God is like really amazing, and the parts that I don't even care to look at. And he says that your feet, they are very, very beautiful to me because you are taking the gospel. Amazing.
But another question I wanted to ask, and it is asked in that same chapter, did they not know? Did they not hear the Jewish people who were chosen by God? Did they not hear?
Yeah. So if God is commanding these many responsibility to the church, and has he not fulfilled in terms of his responsibility towards that particular nation which was called by God? And yes, of course, he did that. In Romans 9, we read all these things, and they were adopted, and they were given the law, they were given the temple ceremonial activity, and they had plenty of prophets. They had their forefathers, and they had promises. Why? Christ himself came as a part of the Jewish nation. And when Apostle Paul is asking, have they heard, in verse 18, and then he says, yes, they did hear. And he quotes Psalm 19, the first few verses, as a creation, as the example, just like how creation is the universal at its universal display, definitely they did hear. But there could be another problem. After hearing, did they understand?
Yeah.
Right? What do you have to say about it? No. So did they understand in verse 19?
They did not understand.
Yeah, they did not understand. Yeah.
Wow.
So that is the beginning of the entire Romans. And if they had understood the righteousness of God, and they would not have done whatever the things that they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
But God is still, pursuing Israel. God has not
Given up on them.
It says in this verse that I will provoke you to jealousy. To those who are not a nation, I will move to you anger by a foolish nation.
Wow.
Because they did not believe the Messiah, it was given to us. We received it, and now God says that you will, in that millennial kingdom, in that time, you will believe, you will come.
Oh, that is a good side of God, right? So when they had not understood, and it was understood by the people who are least expected, right? So Romans 9 ends with, they did not pursue the righteousness of God, and they understood it, like a person like Rahab, right? She said, okay, your God is the God in heaven. And we heard about the Red Sea. And Jesus, time and again in the Gospels, and constantly, elevated the faith of the Gentiles people. And in a way, like, they are being provoked when others receive this precious gift which God has really, given them, and it was rejected by them. He came to his own, and his own rejected him. And whosoever believed, and to them it was given the right to become the child of God. And then it's not that God is like done away with them, and all day long he is spreading his hands, and to the disobedient, that is one of the adjective that is used for Israel, and contrary people, stubborn people. And in a sense, it is not God has rejected them, and it is they have rejected the gospel of God.
One of the traits that come out of unbelief is disobedience.
Disobedient. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
beautiful point. And did you listen to what Noah said? Unbelief does not stop there. It becomes a rebellion, it becomes a disobedient, and it can become very, very dangerous against the kingdom of God itself. So, should we close and take it up Romans 11 at a later episode? And thank you so much for watching. And we have been thinking about Romans 9, 10, 11. And this is the interlude that comes between 1 to 8 and 12 to 16. And the entire theme of the Romans revolves around the righteousness, as we spoke, and how a person is made righteous, and then how the righteous person lives. But in between, the chunk, which is very, very important, how the righteousness of God can be misunderstood. And as he pointed out, and this is doesn't stop in unbelief, but it goes on to a violent and takes on to a violent character and becomes disobedient and rebellion against God himself. So thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.